When the cupboards were nearly bare, breakfast still made it to the table. Your grandparents didn't wake up to avocado toast or drive-through coffee. They made do with scraps. These poor man breakfasts carried families through hard times and then quietly disappeared. So we're going to start our list off with a classic that everyone's familiar with. Stale bread pancakes, and you might be surprised how people made pancakes out of bread, but it's an interesting little process that'll show you just how resourceful we really could be. They're also surprisingly tasty, and the idea here is to soak slices or cube-sized chunks of stale bread in milk, and when even that's not available, water, then mash it up with eggs. You need a little bit of flour for this to work, and whatever extra flair you want to add to it is your own preference. Personally, I always go for some honey. These pancakes are something that isn't just exclusive to American tables either. They're a tradition that stretches from so many different cultures across the world that it's simply just a grandpa meal now. Plus, flavor-wise, these go with any kind of game plan. You can sprinkle some cheese, throw in different kinds of herbs like parsley and oregano for a more aromatic pancake, or go savory with salt and pepper. Everything works, and they're awfully cheap, so why not? Today, we're going to be diving into one of the most unexpected combinations from an old-school kitchen. Yup, fried apples and onions. Those sweet, tender apples and savory caramelized onions make for a much better meal than you would originally think. As they sizzle together in a skillet covered with buttery richness, the dish becomes the peak of comfort food when times are hard and you don't have much in the pantry. This dish is actually something that goes back all the way to the 19th century, specifically in the Appalachian and southern regions, where it was very common in kitchens to make the most of whatever was available. Apples were something that was plentiful, and onions were dirt cheap, so the combination made all the sense in the world when you looked at it from your wallet's point of view. Lard biscuits are pretty much the heroes of old-school baking. If you actually look at it from a historical lens, these unapologetically flavorful biscuits have kept way more bellies full than something like turnips. No, but really, lard biscuits have been a generational safety net for when a hunger pang is about to turn a bad day into a bad week. Lard biscuits were the go-to in southern kitchens for the longest time, even before butter became a staple ingredient in the area. Folks would keep tins of drippings on the stove, but most of the lard was preserved, not because people had to ration it or because they were running awfully short, but because they just liked it that much. Lard biscuits are something you don't see around anymore, but during several of the past few centuries, as well as notable periods like the Great Depression and the World Wars, lard biscuits were man's best friends. Honestly, the fact that nobody is talking about how good molasses toast is these days is certifiably criminal behavior. I just want you to picture hot toast, and I mean real, genuine bread, not packaged, factory-made fluff, but actual freshly baked bread with deep, dark molasses. Not the generic stuff you find in marts and stores nowadays, but actual molasses. Blackstrap, bitter, smoky, sweet, and punchy. This is something brown sugar wishes it could be. Molasses toast is something that was definitely the moment back when it was popular, and those were times when you would consider sugar a luxury. Most folks tried to get it on everything they possibly could, whether that was biscuits, cornbread, hot milk, pies, or toast. The first person to put that stuff on toast hit a gold mine, and everybody copied the blueprint afterwards. The toast was absolutely the move, and butter melting with the molasses created this perfect harmony of sweetness. The bread was the perfect stage for that, and if you had it today, you'd feel like you're going back through time to a farmhouse kitchen in the 40s. You can eat this toast as it is, or mix it up with some honey and nuts if you really feel like bringing out your inner chef. Some people also double down on the sugar rush by adding cinnamon and vanilla extract. Let's talk Cracklin cornbread. This is the cornbread that absolutely doesn't mess around. Like, this is the supersonic of cornbread. This is that rugged, crispy-edged cousin of your typical cornbread muffin, and it brings with it all the rustic charm that cornbread is always known for. Cracklin cornbread has always come from the innovative kitchens of the working class, and this is especially true in the South, where using anything less than all of the hog was considered culinary blasphemy. Wasting fat? You may as well hang up your butcher knife. It was about no waste, and Cracklins were a prime example of why that mentality worked. These were gold, and stirring them into cornbread only made them shine brighter. It made the bread a lot more filling and gave it extra protein, and you needed that because if you were coming back from a day of shoveling mud, then you definitely needed something for those muscles. It was a proper lunch though, and it was even better with some fresh greens on the side. Cracklin cornbread is something that pretty much has faded into the background nowadays, but it was the perfect kind of thing for when you had nothing but a skillet, an empty stomach, and a lot of grit and determination to make something worth eating. It's a 10 out of 10 for a lot of Southerners, and nothing's really changing that. Hot water fried cornmeal cakes are an old-school Southern staple that don't really get even half the love and attention they should these days. I just want you to visualize a crispy, golden brown cornmeal cake with the most incandescent exterior you've ever seen, and then a tender, soft center that just leaves you wanting more and more. But it's natural, and even good, to get curious. And when you hear hot water fried anything, your first instinct is to immediately go like, wait, what? And I really wouldn't blame you. The practice of making cornmeal cakes this way is something that actually goes back several centuries, right back to the enslaved African Americans in the South who were making the first versions of these. Without access to proper feed, not even leavening, they found a way to make do with just cornmeal and water, and these were also known by a much more popular name, hoe cakes. Now, in the end, they started to fall out of everyone's go-to cooking preferences, but I think cornmeal cakes have one more comeback in them, despite it all. Milk toast is also pretty much exactly what you think it is. Back in the old days, it was so much more common for people to take an intentionally frugal approach to how they spent their food, and especially the kind of hacks, snacks, and dishes they would come up with. All of these ideas were centered around being able to make the most using the least amount of time, energy, and ingredients possible. Milk toast is one of the best examples of that because imagine if you tried to make the most out of some milk or some bread before it was about to hit those pearly gates and become fully expired. Yeah? You can't really figure out what to do because while you'd normally just eat them on their own separately, this time that doesn't work. You just go ahead and get milk toast ready. The best part is that it works in 3 different ways. You get a nice healthy meal that's a pretty good breakfast or an interlude meal before your next big meal. You get to save money because you're not letting anything go to waste, nor are you buying something new because these ingredients are probably on their last legs, and you get a pretty lovely dessert out of it too. What's not to like, really? It's kind of insane how convenient milk toast can really be. Tallow fried potatoes are the OG French fries. They're insanely flavorful. They have that beautiful golden sheen to them, and they're about as crispy as you would want the perfect batch of French fries to be. A lot of that color, vividness, and flavor comes from the fact that they're fried in rendered beef fat instead of vegetable oil. Now, back in the day, and I mean way before the 80s, fast food joints like McDonald's were actually using beef tallow in their fries as well. That was a big part of what gave them that original iconic flavor. Tallow helps potatoes achieve a savory flavor that they would never be able to get to on their own. Plus, this just isn't there today with the modern oils we have. The best part really was the exterior, because a simple first bite was about as close to nirvana as you could get. If you were eating these when you were borderline starving, then you were pretty much about to have the best food experience of your life. Tallow was the go-to frying fat for a lot of American diners and fast food kitchens, and it's just not hard to see why. You ever have leftovers but you don't want to make what you had last night? If your leftovers happen to be potatoes, mashed or otherwise, then potato cakes are your hero for today's Saturday dinner. Potato cakes are the ultimate leftover glow-up, and they're a fine example of how putting a little bit of faith, time, and creativity into what you think is nothing that's special can actually result in a killer dish. Potato cakes are made from mashed potatoes that have been mixed with a generous bit of flour, egg, and then shaped into patties until they're golden brown. Just think of them like hash browns, or at least like a distant but more nostalgic and comfier cousin of hash browns. The flavor is what you would expect, but it's honestly more buttery than you would think too. You're really going to have the time of your life if your original mashed potatoes that are left over were made with cream or garlic mixed in, but even if they weren't, that's always a step you can add later. Potato cakes were the gift of several immigrant communities that were putting down roots during the 1800s and 1900s. This is a dish that's been shared among Irish, German, and Polish families, so everybody has their own take on it, and I know boxed mashed potatoes and freezer meals are what everyone goes for today. But this still beats all of that. Vinegar pie for breakfast is something that really just doesn't even sound like a real meal. It honestly sounds like some kind of prank, but no. This is a very real dish, and it actually works in more ways than one. For starters, this doesn't really taste the way you think it would. I know you're imagining some really bitter, acidic notes from the vinegar, but the initial flavor beats are sweet tart, and they give off a very custardy vibe. It's a bit like a lemon chess pie, but just made with your typical pantry staples instead this time. The vinegar is the star of the show, as it should be, and it cuts through almost every other flavor present in the pie, but not to the point where you would think all you can taste here is just vinegar. It's rich. It has this tangy brightness that actually is very stimulating for your taste buds, and if you pair it up with some hot coffee, then it works as well as Bruno Mars does with Anderson .Paak. Vinegar pie is something that strangely, despite being a pretty innovative and flavorful hit, is something that would be called a desperation pie because it's something that was made mostly by the women of the South and the Midwest living in rural populations. Boiled barley porridge is one of those breakfasts that just feels like a pat on the back from a mentor, a hug from your best friend, or a call from your grandparents asking you to come over and try some of that breakfast you always love. It's also something that's built to last you at least until the middle of the day. You make boiled barley porridge by simmering hulled or pearl barley into water and milk, and then you get a soft, creamy texture that almost melts in your mouth. Flavor-wise, though, it's pretty nutty and kind of similar to oatmeal. You get a chewer bite and a bit more earthiness out of this, but it soaks up almost any kind of syrup or liquid you throw at it, as well as spices. That's a big part of why this dish is as flavorful as it is. We're talking about some serious ancient history when we discuss its origins, though, like this is the kind of thing that goes way further back, to the times of the Romans and medieval peasants. In the United States, it's something that was popular first in rural areas and immigrant homes, but each country has its own history with barley. Johnny cakes with sorghum syrup are just straight-up comfort food from a time when breakfast was this familial thing everybody looked forward to, and when breakfast was entirely made from scratch. Johnny cakes are these rustic little cornmeal pancakes that are actually very no-nonsense. None of the fluff, flair, and aesthetic charm you would normally associate with pancakes. Do you know that super cozy vibe they give off? Just not there this time. Johnny cakes are coarse, they're not the eBay when it comes to presentation, and they actually have this very deep, toasty corn flavor that pairs almost a little too well with the smokiness and richness of sorghum syrup. You can either use this in a dipping cup or drizzle it on top, but let's be real, the dipping cup is sacred. Anything else is blasphemy. Johnny cakes also have something of a history that goes back all the way to the indigenous peoples. They were the first ones to teach colonists how you handle cornmeal and how you should cook with it, and they were made to mirror the effects of other popular survivalist Native American food, such as pemmican. Its main function was lasting on long journeys and providing you with a boost of energy to carry on with your travels. Bread scramble is pretty much one of those moments of sheer creativity, resourcefulness, and making the most out of things that just would never go together if you were adhering to common sense. It's a throw-together breakfast if I've ever seen one. You would honestly be hard-pressed to not call this survivalist cooking. It's exactly what you might think it is, too. Torn up pieces of bread that's either a day old at best or several at worst tossed up into a hot skillet. Add some butter and bacon grease, then scramble it up to high heaven with some eggs. People would typically add whatever scraps they could to make the meal stand out a bit more. They'd add leftover ham, onions, and different kinds of herbs, and flavor-wise, just think of it like a bread-based omelet. It actually soaks up a lot of the eggs and fat, so it's definitely a lot more flavorful than you would expect, and it gets the job done well enough from what is essentially a very impromptu breakfast. Probably end up with a nasty case of heartburn if you use this recipe regularly, though. I think the most intimate food experience for anyone from the South is easily just hominy grits. Like, these are definitely a Southern ride or die as far as breakfast is considered. Creamy, Loaded with corn and customizable in about 1,000 different ways, there's a lot that Hominy grits bring to the table that other dishes just don't seem to compare to. And that too on a budget. They're made from hominy, which is essentially just dried corn that's been treated with an alkaline solution and then grounded into coarse grits. And when cooked slowly with water, milk, and broth, they actually turn into this incredibly thick, fantastic porridge that's worth its weight in gold. What makes Hominy grits really stand out is their sheer versatility, though. I mean, the possibilities are quite literally endless. You can go the savory route or the super sweet route, and all you have to do is just add a bit more of whatever spices, seasonings, and herbs you're working with. Hominy grits are so effective largely because they were a Native American creation. The tribes were making hominy a long time before any Europeans set foot on American soil, and they helped to popularize the tradition, which is how it turned into a go-to for Southern kitchens by the 19th century. Eggless pancakes. So the first time you hear that, you just automatically think that there's no real reason why these should exist because what's next? Brickless buildings? But really, eggless pancakes have been around for far longer than you would think. This is especially true for lean periods like the Great Depression or wartime rationing in the 1940s, and a lot of eggs back then were actually decently more expensive than people could afford, or they just weren't available because somebody who could afford them likely scooped most of them up. COVID-era bulk buying wasn't really an isolated event, I guess. Most recipes would essentially just rely on baking powder for the fluff and use some kind of oil or milk along with flour. Old-school versions, and I mean proper vintage recipes, would even include mashed bananas, vinegar, and some applesauce, and that's some proper veganism if you ask me. Eggless pancakes have largely faded into the background now, but they were definitely one of the most affordable meals our grandparents grew up with back in the day. Now, crust coffee soak, on the other hand, is something that is actually wondrous. It's a take on stale bread crusts, and I mean the little leftover bits that almost nobody likes eating, and the idea here is actually pretty interesting. You take those crusts, soak them in hot coffee, sometimes a dash of sugar and a splash of milk, and you actually end up reviving the stale bread crusts completely. It was a very bare-bones dish, don't get me wrong, but it was also surprisingly comfortable if you grew up with it. Think about all the other things you can do with this too, like coffee-soaked bread pudding. Although, if we're being realistic, it's definitely just survival food at its core. You might still find old people today who remember their grandparents making this dish for them, but largely speaking, it wasn't that much of a hit, but it was amazing at saving money and keeping your appetite quiet for just a little while longer. Oatmeal water porridge is something that sounds like it's ripped right out of a Depression-era cookbook, but that's only because it really is. It was supposed to be this zero-wastage dish that would inspire people to make the most out of the least, but it didn't really go past poor farming communities and immigrant-dense areas. What it was good for was digestion, though, because this was insanely light on the stomach, while also being really filling. So the parents that did know about this would make it obsessively for their children, and back then, kids were a lot more cool about putting up with oatmeal. It was also perfect sick person food. Plus, even if none of that applied to a person back then, they'd still probably be living paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes oatmeal helps when it's not payday yet. The point being that everyone had a run-in with this at some point, but only a select few communities made a thing out of it regularly. Oatmeal water porridge is just oats simmered in plain water too, so it makes sense why it didn't go too far in the broader world. You don't have milk, sugar, or any extras here, and it was pretty much the definition of what you would call frugal. It was used in times when dairy was really unavailable and money just wasn't there, and texture-wise, it's a lot thinner than you can imagine. All that to say, it's likely not the most appealing bite. Applesauce bread is essentially what you think it is. This super cozy, sweet-smelling loaf of bread works wonders, and it makes your entire kitchen feel like an advertisement for autumn, but right in the middle of April. It's soft, really moist, and spiced just right so that it's not really overwhelming, but you can definitely pick up on those cinnamon and nutmeg notes. A bit of clove here and there also does wonders for the dish. The applesauce is something that keeps it really tender without needing a lot of butter or soil, and this is, to be honest, most of the point. It was a go-to during the 30s and 40s, especially in wartime kitchens where fat and eggs were pretty much rationed. Applesauce was really cheap. It was something that was easy to get at home, it doubled as a sweetener and a binder, and it ended up being perfect for cakes, breads, and cookies. Flavor-wise, it's something that you could call a mixture of banana bread and spice cake, so it's not too sugary, but it feels rich enough that you can definitely call it a dessert. Fried cornbread batter is what it sounds like, to be honest. It's a cornbread mix that involves no eggs or sugar, and it's spooned right into a hot skillet and fried like a pancake. And some people actually prefer the term corn dodgers because of this. Although, my personal favorite is hoe cakes. It depends on the region, and it's the same idea, the hot and crispy golden discs of fried corn. Goodness you get are indescribably amazing and rich. Plus, inside they're really soft and crumbly, while on the outside, they have those perfectly browned edges that you just want with every single bite. This was minimalist Southern food. Well, as minimal as anything can ever be in the South. It didn't originate in typical Southern communities, though. This was a dish that came right out of African American traditions, and it was passed down through several generations because of how effective it was at keeping you full. These days, you don't really see fried cornbread batter anywhere except barbecue joints that try to pay respect to their vintage roots. But with a dish this easy, bringing it back wouldn't take any work at all. So, a peanut butter molasses sandwich is pretty much as good as it gets. It's old-school lunchbox energy, and it's sticky, sweet, and salty. It's pretty much made to power you through the day on a mostly low-key budget, and it's also exactly what it sounds like. This is a very hearty smear of peanut butter, and it's usually something that's layered with a drizzle of molasses on plain sandwich bread. Molasses tend to add this really deep, smoky sweetness that's a lot more intense than any kind of honey or jelly, and the peanut butter essentially rings the salt and fat. This makes it really well balanced and filling, and the sandwich shows up a lot more during times when economic crises were your average Tuesday. I'm talking about periods like the Depression and the middle part of the 1940s, where even an egg was not really promised to you. This was especially true for people in working-class homes. Peanut butter was something that people loved because it was really heavy in protein and dense, and it would work more often than not with molasses. The boldness and earthy sweetness of molasses actually bounced off really well with the richness of the peanut butter, and it's not a light sandwich at all. Boiled wheat berries and sugar syrup porridge is something that's the kind of breakfast that just transports you through time. It takes you back to a world where everything is made from scratch. There's no back of the label you have to read, and the phrase pre-packaged isn't something your kids know yet. Nothing went to waste, everything was fresh, it was what Cartoon Network made you think the world was going to be like. Or those Disney and Ghibli movies, just anything with a hint of soul, you know? The wheat berries were really exquisite too, the ideal thing for putting somebody in a food coma. Flavor-wise, this is as rustic and comforting as it gets. The wheat berries have a very nutty aroma to them, an incredibly chewy texture, and the syrup is something that gives a very nice sweetness. It makes the dish feel like a wonderful treat without really doing too much, and the syrup is something that really adds to that. It's one of those breakfasts that really makes a cold morning into a scene ripped right out of some indie film. The porridge was something that peaked in popularity throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, and that was especially true for rural households where wheat was very cheap and accessible. Today, it's a nostalgic recipe you find in ancient cookbooks, but it's worth making. Now, if you want to talk about something that's really underrated, it would be criminal to not mention hardtack crackers with honey. These bad boys are about the next best thing when toast just seems like an unlikely fantasy. Also, once 6-0 start pouring that honey on them, they become a completely different meal. Now, hardtacks are always something people have associated with tough times because, being totally real with you, very few people like eating these unless they have to. Everyone would rather prefer some kind of biscuit or actual crackers or just anything to do with cornmeal. But hey, that's what the honey is supposed to be for, and that's honestly what helps it stand out as a perfectly light meal to get your day started. When you're low on money, you can't really pick and choose much, but you can definitely experiment carefully with what you do have. What some people would do is throw them in a skillet and gently fry them with lard for a bit of extra flavor, but that always seemed like it didn't work with the coarse nature of hardtack. What about you? if you had nothing to eat but a tin of these? How are you spicing it up? Hardtack might sound like a pirate snack, and honestly, you wouldn't be wrong. This rock-hard cracker was a staple for soldiers, sailors, and settlers alike. Anyone who needed food that could last months or even years. Made simply from flour and water, hardtack was famously tough to chew, earning nicknames like tooth duller and molar breaker. But here's where things got clever. To make this bland biscuit remotely edible, people would soak it in water, milk, or even coffee to soften it up. Now add a generous smear of honey or syrup, and suddenly you've got a sweet treat that feels like a luxury in hard times. Back in the day, honey was nature's candy, and drizzling it over softened hardtack transformed survival food into a breakfast comfort. So why did it disappear? Well, once fresher options and modern preservation methods came along, hardtack lost its charm. Plus, people today aren't exactly thrilled about eating something that requires pre-soaking unless it's oatmeal. Supermarkets brimming with fluffy pastries and freshly baked bread have pushed this once practical dish into just a figment of history. Before butter became the reigning toast topper, our frugal forebears embraced something a bit more rustic like rendered animal fat smeared across toasted bread. Whether it was pork lard, beef tallow, or even goose fat, this golden spread was the original zero-waste culinary move. After frying up bacon or roasting meats, no one dared throw away the precious fat. Instead, they'd strain and save it, turning it into a savory, energy-packed breakfast boost. Some would sprinkle a pinch of salt, herbs, or if you were feeling fancy, even a touch of sugar to balance the richness. Back then, animal fat wasn't just a cooking byproduct. It was a prized resource, especially during lean times. For rural families and urban laborers alike, it provided essential calories to power through physically demanding days. But as refrigeration, vegetable oils, and dairy products became widespread, rendered fat slowly slid off the breakfast menu. Health trends also played a part. The low-fat craze of the late 20th century practically demonized it. Today, while foodies are rediscovering nose-to-tail cooking and chefs are reviving schmaltz and drippings for flavor-packed dishes, rendered fat on morning toast remains mostly a culinary ghost. Still, it's a fascinating reminder of a time when nothing went to waste, and breakfast was as much about survival as it was about satisfaction. Lastly, after you've polished off your toast with a hearty smear of rendered fat, what's next? Well, you'd reach for a steaming bowl of Hasty pudding, the breakfast MVP of the thrifty kitchen. Made from humble cornmeal, this quick-cooked mush was beloved in early American kitchens for being fast, filling, and fantastically versatile. Colonial cooks simply boiled cornmeal with water or milk until thick and creamy, then topped it with a drizzle of molasses, honey, or even a bit of leftover fat for extra richness. Think of it as the rustic cousin of modern-day polenta or cream of wheat, but with frontier grit. Hasty pudding got its name for good reason. It was a no-fuss dish that came together in minutes, making it perfect for hard-working families who didn't have time for elaborate breakfasts. It filled bellies and fueled long days of labor on farms, in factories, and at sea. But over time, as breakfast menus became fancier and quicker convenience foods flooded the market, Hasty pudding fell out of favor. Puffed rice cereal was shot from guns. That was not a joke. That was the actual slogan. And if that sounds dramatic, it is because cereal marketing in the mid-20th century was off the rails. You would open a tall tin can, yes, a literal metal can of cereal, and pour out a mound of puffed air disguised as breakfast. Puffed rice was bland, had the texture of packing peanuts, and got soggy 5 seconds after milk hit it. But kids ate it by the bowlful. Why? Because the name sounded dangerous and the commercials were wild. There was something thrilling about knowing your cereal had been blasted into existence with air cannons and then sealed in a tin like military rations. Plus, it made a great sound when it hit the bowl. The taste? Forgettable. But in a time when breakfast had to stretch and shelf life mattered more than flavor, puffed rice did its job. You could eat it dry, throw some sugar on top, or mix it with something else entirely. And for families who grew up on wartime habits and post-war marketing, it was a compromise that stuck around. But not everything from that era was dry or crunchy. Some breakfasts were warm, brown, and stirred in circles. Creamed eggs on toast involves gently chopped hard-boiled eggs in a creamy sauce, often seasoned with herbs and spices, served over toasted bread. This dish, known for its comforting qualities and simple preparation, became a favored breakfast and light meal option, aligning with American preferences for hearty, straightforward dishes. The versatility in seasoning allowed for a variety of flavors, making it a popular choice in both diners and home kitchens. The dish's rich, creamy texture combined with the ease of preparation made it a reliable choice for a satisfying meal, fitting well into the meal routines of many seeking both comfort and simplicity in their culinary choices. If you ever ate pie while standing in front of the fridge with a spoon and a guilty conscience, then welcome home. But not every shortcut was sweet. Some were warm, brown, and brewed from desperation. Postum was not coffee, it just looked like it was. For many families, it was the hot beverage of choice, especially when actual coffee was too expensive or frowned upon for kids. Made from roasted grains and molasses, Postum was marketed as the wholesome, caffeine-free alternative. And somehow people bought into that. You would stir a spoonful into hot water and try to convince yourself it tasted like something grown-ups would drink. It had this deep, earthy flavor that hovered somewhere between toasted bread and boiled pencil shavings. Not terrible, just different. And when paired with a piece of dry toast, it became a breakfast that felt oddly noble. You were not indulging. You were starting the day with restraint. Postum was the drink of war years, depression years, and anyone trying to avoid caffeine jitters. It was the beverage equivalent of "we make do." And if you sipped it from a chipped mug while flipping through the newspaper or stared out the window while steam fogged your glasses, then you get it. That kind of quiet breakfast was not rare. It was routine. But when even bread was running low, folks had to get creative with what they spread, or did not spread, on top. Eggs in a nest, also known as eggs in a frame, brought a playful twist to traditional breakfast eggs by frying them inside a hole cut from a slice of bread. This simple yet delightful dish allowed for creativity and personalization during preparation, making breakfast an engaging meal. It was particularly popular for its ease of preparation and the joy it brought to the breakfast table, allowing for variations such as different bread types or added toppings like cheese or herbs. The interactive cooking process, cutting the bread and watching the egg cook perfectly in the middle, was a key appeal, making it a favorite among families. This dish stood out for its simplicity and the fun it added to cooking, making it a go-to choice for a quick and enjoyable breakfast. If you have ever stood in front of a stove flipping cornmeal slices while the rest of the house was still dark, then you already know. This was comfort food with calluses. But sometimes, breakfast took a hard left turn into the bizarre, like when eggs were not enough. So you added ketchup. There is no middle ground with ketchup on scrambled eggs. You either grew up with it or you think it is culinary heresy. But for millions of American kids, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, it was just how breakfast worked. Eggs were cheap, ketchup was everywhere. Put the two together and you had a meal that felt familiar, even if it looked like something from a preschool food fight. This was not about haute cuisine, it was about speed and taste. Kids loved it because ketchup made everything taste like a hot dog. Parents loved it because it kept the complaining to a minimum. And let us be honest, these were not fluffy French omelets. These were dry, overcooked eggs tossed in a pan until they barely held together. The ketchup gave them life. It also gave them color, which was important in a decade where most food was beige. Some folks even added it to fried eggs or egg sandwiches, claiming it just worked. And if you still do it today, no judgment. Nostalgia is powerful stuff. But ketchup was not the only flavor booster in town. Sometimes, you needed something with a bit more iron. Maypo instant maple oatmeal set itself apart in the competitive oatmeal market with its unique maple flavor and the ease of instant preparation. Introduced in 1953, it became especially popular among families for its appealing taste and the memorable marketing character Marky Maypo, which resonated with children. The convenience of just adding hot water made Maypo a preferred choice for quick breakfasts, aligning well with the growing demand for efficient meal solutions. The distinctive maple flavor offered a sweet, comforting taste that stood out from more traditional oatmeal flavors, making Maypo a notable option in the breakfast category, favored for its taste and quick preparation. Ovaltine was for people who wanted hot cocoa, but wound up with vitamins instead. You would scoop the brown powder into a mug, add hot water or milk, and stir, and stir, and stir some more, because it never truly dissolved. You would sip it and still find clumps floating at the top. The taste? Malted, vaguely chocolatey, with a lingering aftertaste of health. But Ovaltine was not just about flavor. It was about promises. The box claimed to make you stronger, smarter, and healthier, all while giving off the vibe of a prescription from your grandma. It was especially popular during the 1940s through the 1960s, when anything that could be fortified with vitamins was instantly approved by parents. And if you were sick, forget it. Ovaltine was coming your way whether you wanted it or not. It was like the soup of the breakfast world, supposedly comforting, vaguely medicinal, and always a little too warm. Kids would pretend to enjoy it, stirring it until the top got cold and the bottom got gritty. And if you ever drank it through a striped straw just to distract yourself, congratulations, you are in the club. But for some families, breakfast was even stranger. It came straight from a can and always smelled like regret. Frosted Flakes with half and half was the breakfast of champions if your goal was to feel full until dinner. This was not your average milk and cereal situation. This was decadence disguised as routine. You would pour yourself a big bowl of Frosted Flakes, already sweet enough to power a third grader through gym class, and then drown it in half and half. Not milk, not cream, that luxurious middle ground where things got dangerously rich. The flakes would float, slowly losing their crunch as the thick liquid coated every surface. The first few bites felt like dessert, but by the bottom of the bowl, you were rethinking your life choices. Still, you knew you would do it again the next morning because it was just that good. First bite? Heavenly? Fifth bite? Questionable. But the sugar and fat combo made it weirdly addictive. It was the kind of breakfast that whispered, "You will regret this." But you did it anyway. And for many families, this was just how cereal was served, especially when whole milk was out and half was all you had left from Sunday dinner. It was resourceful. It was a little rebellious, and if you ever stood at the counter eating it straight from the mixing bowl while someone yelled at you to get ready for school, then congratulations. You lived. But cereal was not the only leftover fusion people created in the morning. Some families went full spaghetti sandwich. German pancakes, also known as Dutch babies, are a unique breakfast dish that originated in the early 20th century. These pancakes are often topped with powdered sugar or fruit. The ingredients for German pancakes include eggs, flour, milk, and sugar, creating a batter that is poured into a hot skillet and baked in the oven. The key ingredient that gives German pancakes their distinct puffiness is eggs, which cause the batter to rise dramatically while baking. These pancakes are typically served with a squeeze of lemon and a dusting of powdered sugar, enhancing their delicate flavor. In the 1960s, Dutch babies gained popularity in California, thanks to Sunset magazine featuring the recipe in their publication. German pancakes are also commonly referred to as Dutch babies, a name popularized in the United States. Hot Dr. Pepper was real. It was not a prank. It was not a joke. It was an actual breakfast drink, served warm, with a slice of lemon floating on top like it belonged there. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Dr. Pepper Company rolled out ads urging families to heat their soda in a saucepan and drink it like tea. And people did. They poured it into mugs, called it comforting, and sipped it alongside eggs and toast like this was totally normal. There was something oddly cozy about sipping soda that steamed like coffee, even if it tasted like fizzy syrup trying to be sophisticated. It was part science experiment, part nostalgia bomb. One sip, and you were either delighted or deeply confused. It smelled like caramelized chemicals and tasted like soda-flavored syrup with a citrus twist. Kids loved it, adults tolerated it, and on cold winter mornings, it hit the spot, mostly because you had no idea what else to serve. The lemon slice added a whiff of class, even though the whole idea screamed experimental chemistry. If you ever walked into a kitchen that smelled like a candy factory was melting, chances are someone had a pot of soda on the stove. And if that was your idea of a warm beverage, then you are probably still wondering why it disappeared. But hot soda was not the only strange liquid to hit the breakfast table. Some folks poured something even weirder into a glass and called it a meal. Curious how Jiffy Pop pancakes made morning meals a breeze with their just add water mix during the hectic 70s. This convenience resonated deeply with the 1970s households, streamlining the morning routine remarkably. The product's simplicity allowed anyone to quickly whip up pancakes, making it a popular choice among families with busy schedules. Jiffy Pop's marketing cleverly focused on these time-saving aspects, often showcasing family breakfasts that were both delicious and hassle-free. The mix was versatile, catering to various taste preferences with different flavors. While Jiffy Pop pancakes enjoyed popularity due to their convenience and taste, the evolving breakfast market eventually led to reduced visibility and presence, as newer breakfast options continued to diversify. Canned peaches over cottage cheese was the dish that blurred the line between breakfast and 1950s diet food. You would open a tin, let that sweet syrup drip, and gently plop a golden peach half on top of a scoop of cottage cheese. No cooking, no seasoning, just sweet and salty, soft and curdled. It was strangely elegant in a plastic plate sort of way. You might have seen it at church potlucks, cafeterias, or grandma's house, where the fridge always had a cold can ready to go. Cottage cheese was sold as a health food, high in protein, low in guilt. Peaches made it feel like a treat. Add a sprig of mint or a maraschino cherry, and you had something that vaguely resembled a sundae. It was also incredibly practical. No waste, no mess, and it looked prettier than it had any right to. But let us not pretend kids were lining up for it. This was adult breakfast, quiet, efficient, and undeniably retro. If you ever sat at the table pushing canned peaches around with your spoon while your parents read the paper, you are definitely part of a very specific club. But even this was nothing compared to the boldest fish-forward move of the morning. For $2.99, Wendy's would introduce the Wendy's Superbar in 1988, which was an entire buffet that did extremely well with fans. People went in absolutely insane numbers and crowds to take full advantage of what seemed like a deal too good to be true. The kind of maybe when hell freezes over situations you never really imagine yourself actually experiencing. Yet that is exactly what people got in those blessed times. A proper and delicious buffet that did not break the bank. Unfortunately, it was not that good for the company as it got pretty expensive and hard to maintain, so they discontinued it after just a calm decade. Grape Nuts was not a cereal. It was a challenge, a bowl of hard, crunchy nuggets that felt more like punishment than breakfast, unless you knew the trick. You had to soften them with hot water. That was the secret. Pour it in, let it sit, and wait. If you were impatient, you would regret it. Teeth were lost to Grape Nuts. It was dense, it was earthy, and it never pretended to be fun. But for a generation raised on rationing and stretching every dollar, Grape Nuts had value. It was filling, it was affordable, and it lasted forever in the pantry. You could mix in some sugar, a splash of milk, maybe a bit of cinnamon if you were feeling fancy. But most days, it was just water and hope. Kids today would call it cardboard. Back then, it was considered hearty. And the weird thing is, some people actually liked it that way. Especially when the weather was cold and the house was quiet. A warm bowl of Grape Nuts felt kind of grounding. Not exciting, not delicious, just real. But sometimes, when you were lucky or just ran out of options, breakfast came straight from the fridge and straight from dessert. Blast off with tang. Launched by General Foods in 1959, this vibrant drink rocketed into popularity by becoming the beverage of choice for astronauts during the 1960s space race. This stellar connection provided Tang with an unbeatable marketing boost, aligning it with innovation and adventure. With a lineup of flavors like orange, grape, and tropical punch, orange soared as the fan favorite, beloved for its vivid color and zesty taste. Tang's ads frequently featured space missions, solidifying its image as the futuristic drink of choice. Originally designed as a vitamin-enriched drink for convenience, Tang later shifted its marketing towards health-focused themes to keep up with changing consumer preferences about natural ingredients and sugar content. Kellogg's Product 19 was not just cereal. It was a statement. A beige box with a no-nonsense name, it looked like something you would find in a government ration kit. No cartoon tiger, no marshmallows, just flakes. Vitamin-enriched, iron-packed flakes that promise to do everything except taste good. Product 19 was Kellogg's answer to, well, nutrition. A cereal so serious it could only be marketed to adults, or kids whose parents shopped like nutritionists. You knew your friend's house was different when Product 19 showed up on the breakfast table instead of Sugar Pops or Fruit Loops. The texture was dry, the flavor was cardboard, but it made you feel responsible. Like eating it might actually make you taller, or better at math. It was the cereal version of homework, and if you had to suffer through it just to get the toy buried in the box, you earned it. But some families did not even bother with cereal. They just went straight for toast. Not with jam, not with butter, but with something far more intense. McDonald's is a name anyone can recognize and still holds up today just as much as before, but do you remember when they were serving the iconic big breakfast at stores? McDonald's best and most iconic starter was probably their big breakfast, which literally everybody can remember having. This dish was truly a star on the 70s and 80s menus way before anybody ever even thought of a McMuffin. Mostly popular amongst teenagers working part-time, and McDonald's staff would enjoy a big breakfast on early work days. It was not just them, trust us. 8-year-olds to 35-year-olds all enjoyed getting soft, delicious scrambled eggs served with the fluffiest muffins you could get under $1. Sounds like a pretty good deal, right? No wonder it performed as well as it did, even if it got discontinued in 2002 in favor of hot dogs and burgers. Cornbread in buttermilk in a glass. No plate, no fork, just crumble, pour, and drink. Or scoop it with a spoon, depending on your texture tolerance. This was rural breakfast science at its finest, a southern tradition that turned dry, leftover cornbread into something hearty, tangy, and oddly refreshing. The cornbread, ideally a bit stale, would be broken into chunks and tossed into a tall glass. Then came the buttermilk, thick, sour, and ice cold. It was a weird blend of creamy, sour, and gritty, but to those who grew up on it, it was comfort in a cup. It filled you up, cooled you down, and somehow made you feel like you were doing something right. Some people added salt, others stirred in sugar. But most just left it as is, letting the bread absorb the buttermilk until it became a chunky, tangy porridge. It sounds bizarre until you try it. And if you grew up in a house where cornbread was made in cast iron and buttermilk was always in the fridge, this dish was second nature. It was not glamorous, but it was filling and cheap. It got you through the day and made use of every crumb. If you ever watched someone eat this and thought, maybe, you are not alone. And if you actually liked it, then welcome to the secret club. But if soggy bread drinks are not your thing, how about cereal with a twist only the brave attempted? A mini skillet bowl sounds healthy enough, right? That was not the only fast food name that would take a step in a more greener direction, as McDonald's came out with their fruit and yogurt parfait sometime after their big breakfast, initially being a sweet cup you could get for just $1. It was also a wonderful breakfast if you were trying for a healthier lifestyle or were one of those early morning run people. Maybe you had the gym in the afternoon and were keener on lighter breakfasts, or maybe you just want to get your fruit game up. Either way, the parfait sold in waves and made sales go high for an item that was irregular from the rest of the menu. Unfortunately, it was something they discontinued during the pandemic to make service quicker for workers because everyone prioritized minimizing contact back then. Cornmeal mush was never glamorous, but slice it, fry it, and suddenly it had presence. The night before, someone would stir cornmeal into boiling water until it thickened into a gloopy, beige brick. You would pour it into a loaf pan, let it sit overnight, and by morning, you had yourself a solid chunk of survival. Slice it up, toss it into a hot skillet with bacon grease or whatever oil you could spare, and fry until the edges got crispy and golden. The inside stayed soft, kind of like polenta that had given up on being fancy. You would top it with syrup, sometimes butter, maybe even a spoonful of jam if you were feeling fancy. And yes, people called it breakfast. It was warm, filling, and made out of almost nothing, which was exactly the point. This was the food of people who could stretch a penny until it squeaked. No waste, no fuss, and no excuses. Lastly, grilled grapefruit with maraschino cherries offered a unique blend of tart and sweet flavors, becoming a popular breakfast dish during the mid-20th century. The preparation involved having a grapefruit, sprinkling it with sugar, and broiling it until caramelized, then topping it with a maraschino cherry for added sweetness and visual appeal. This combination of flavors and the simple yet elegant presentation made it a sophisticated breakfast choice. The dish was often part of a larger breakfast spread, admired for its vibrant appearance and the delightful contrast of flavors. Its straightforward preparation allowed home cooks to easily create a gourmet-like dish, enhancing the breakfast experience with a touch of indulgence and culinary flair. Sardines on toast. That is it. That was the breakfast. A few oily, salty fish laid out over a slice of dry toast, sometimes with mustard, sometimes with nothing at all. This was peak efficiency. Sardines came in little tins with pull tabs and olive oil, and once opened, there was no going back. You either learned to love them, or you left the room. But in many households, especially immigrant or coastal communities, sardines were normal. They were rich in protein, did not require refrigeration, and could be eaten cold. They slid out of the can like they were daring you to try them, and once you did, you either never looked back or never forgave your parents. The smell alone would hang in the kitchen like a stubborn ghost, and yet somehow they kept showing up on toast. Bonus points if you smashed them onto toast with a fork and added some black pepper or a squeeze of lemon. That was the deluxe version. For others, it was just fish and bread, plain and honest. Kids would gag. Grandparents would smile. And somewhere in the middle, someone would quietly eat their sardines and be grateful they were not powdered eggs again. It was not about flavor. It was about function. And if that sound of the tin peeling open still triggers memories, you know exactly what kind of breakfast we are talking about. But not every vintage morning started with toast and fish. Some of them started with hot soda, literally. Sugar Smacks was not just cereal. It was barely cereal. It was more like candied puffs pretending to be nutritious, and somehow that was enough. If you remember pouring yourself a giant bowl of Sugar Smacks while your parents sat across from you sipping on straight black coffee, welcome to the real breakfast club. The contrast was wild. You had a sugar explosion on one side of the table and bitter rocket fuel on the other. That was the vibe. Adults drank coffee because they were tired. Kids ate sugar cereal because it made the cartoons funnier. And sometimes, if your parents were really running behind, you would take a sip of their coffee out of curiosity and immediately regret it. No cream, no sugar, just punishment in a cup. But you would go back for more anyway, because somehow the bitterness of the coffee balanced the ridiculous sweetness of the cereal. It made you feel older, like you belonged at the big table. That was the thing about breakfast back then. It was a weird mix of indulgence and grit. And if you remember tearing through a box of Sugar Smacks while sipping burnt diner coffee from your dad's chipped mug, you are not just old, you are vintage. But not every cereal was sugary. Some were practically gravel. Costing nothing but $1.03 of your time as the service worker assembled it, Taco Bell's mini skillet bowls were an amazing breakfast and lunch that people adored picking up. Why was it so good for takeout especially, and not a meal you would typically sit down and have? Because it was super quick in all regards, the preparation and the consumption. A quick affair to get you all readied up on your way to work or school. And it was always a sunny plus side that it left you with enough lunch money for later. In the corporate world, you really need cash on hand at all times for those midday cravings. And that is a part of why fast food culture and restaurants got so popular in the first place. Since the famous Old Bell decided to take down the mini skillet bowls from their already stellar menu, people have found quick substitutes and ways around it. Butter was a luxury. Margarine was suspicious. But bacon grease? That was breakfast gold. If you had a metal canister on the stove filled with congealed fat and a strainer on top, you already know where this is going. Toast with bacon drippings was a rite of passage. Crispy white bread smeared with yesterday's leftover lard, sometimes sprinkled with salt, sometimes just eaten as is. It was smoky, greasy, and completely satisfying. And back then, no one cared about saturated fats or cholesterol levels. The grease was recycled like liquid currency. Families kept it in old coffee tins or jelly jars, and if you ever scooped a thick glob of solid bacon fat onto toast and watched it melt into the bread like butter from another planet, then yes, you might be old. This was fuel for a long day, and it came with that unmistakable aroma that clung to your clothes long after the plate was clean. You did not waste anything. That was the rule. If you had bacon, you kept the grease. If you had grease, you made toast. And if you were really lucky, you had something even fancier waiting in the freezer. It came in a yellow box, and all you had to do was Lego. Post-fortified oat flakes were marketed as a health-oriented breakfast option, enriched with vitamins and minerals to appeal to health-conscious consumers. Introduced by Post cereals, they were promoted for their benefits like improved heart health and additional fiber, aligning with the increasing health trends of the mid-20th century. The oat flakes stood out for their nutritional value and were marketed through various campaigns emphasizing their health benefits. These flakes were known for their hearty texture, which provided a fulfilling start to the day, making them a favored choice for those looking to maintain a healthy diet. The focus on health and nutrition helped establish post-fortified oat flakes as a reliable breakfast option during their time on the market. Leftover liver and onions for breakfast is the kind of thing that instantly tells you what generation someone is from. To many, it sounds like a punishment. To others, it was normal. Liver was cheap, nutritious, and widely available. Three things that mattered way more than taste. It came sliced, fried, and smothered in onions to soften both the texture and the blow. You might have had it for dinner the night before, and if there were leftovers, guess what was reheated in the skillet first thing in the morning? The smell alone was enough to clear a room. Metallic, meaty, and unmistakably intense. But it stuck to your ribs, and that was what mattered. Especially for working-class families or folks still shaking off Depression-era habits, liver and onions represented a kind of no-nonsense nourishment. And if you doused it in Worcestershire sauce or ate it with toast, you could almost convince yourself it was good. Almost. But if you ever woke up to that smell and thought, oh good, there's some left, then yes, you might be old. And if your breakfast was not liver, it might have come from the cold side of the fridge, swimming in syrupy nostalgia. Remember Grape Nuts flakes? Introduced as a variant of the original Grape Nuts cereal, offered a flakier texture while retaining the nutritional benefits of the original, such as being high in fiber and low in sugar. These flakes appealed to consumers seeking a nutritious yet convenient breakfast option, fitting well into a balanced diet. Known for their crunchy texture, Grape Nuts flakes were often consumed with milk or yogurt, providing a satisfying meal. The cereal was marketed for its health benefits, which resonated with health-conscious consumers. The distinct texture and robust flavor of Grape Nuts flakes made them a staple in some homes, favored for their contribution to a healthy lifestyle and their ability to offer a fulfilling start to the day. Frozen waffles were not always trendy. In fact, in the 1970s, they were barely waffles. They came out stiff, pale, and freezer-burned, and you would shove them into a toaster and pray they did not come out still cold in the middle. Eggo waffles were a revolution, sure, but they were also kind of sad. They were not crisp unless you nearly burnt them, and they absorbed syrup like a sponge that had given up on life. But they were fast, and that was everything. Parents would toss one on a paper plate and call it breakfast. No whipped cream, no berries, just syrup, maybe margarine if it was payday. The commercials made them look like golden magic, but in real life, they were floppy, forgettable, and weirdly satisfying. If you remember struggling to butter a still-frozen waffle, or watching one fly out of the toaster and land on the floor, you already know the deal. It was not gourmet, it was survival. And for kids of the 1970s and 1980s, this was the norm. But waffles were not the only thing you pulled from a box. Some breakfasts came in actual tin cans and were advertised like they had been launched from a cannon. And that wraps up the best poor man's breakfast, which our grandfather enjoyed the most. Comment which dish should be brought back today, and don't forget to like and subscribe.